I accidentally discovered my husband was my half-brother. What would you do if a simple DNA test revealed that the love of your life was also the brother you never knew you had? What would you do if a simple DNA test revealed that the love of your life was also the brother you never knew you had? My name is Jessica, and I was 32 years old when my perfect world came crashing down around me. I had been married to David for 6 wonderful years, and we were what everyone would describe as the ideal couple. We met in college during a crowded lecture hall where we both reached for the same textbook. That chance encounter blossomed into a beautiful relationship built on trust, respect, and undeniable chemistry. David was tall, with kind brown eyes that crinkled when he laughed, and a smile that could light up any room. He worked as an architect, while I taught 3rd grade at a local elementary school. We had purchased our first home 3 years after getting married, a cozy colonial with a white picket fence that sat on a quiet street lined with mature oak trees. We were planning to start a family soon, having put it off until we felt financially stable. Life was progressing exactly as we had envisioned it. The trouble began innocently enough when my parents gave us ancestry DNA kits for Christmas. They had become fascinated with their own family history after discovering distant relatives in Ireland, and they wanted us to join in on the excitement. David and I laughed about it at first, joking about what surprising ancestry might be revealed. Neither of us knew much about our extended families beyond grandparents, as both of us had come from relatively small family units. David had been adopted as an infant and knew nothing about his biological parents, while I knew only that my mother had been raised by a single parent who passed away when I was young. The idea of uncovering hidden branches of our family trees seemed intriguing but harmless. We waited until New Year's Day to perform the tests, making it a fun activity to kick off the year. Following the instructions carefully, we both provided our saliva samples and mailed them in the prepaid envelopes. The company promised results within 6 to 8 weeks, and we honestly didn't think much about it after that. Life continued as usual, with work, home projects, and weekend getaways. We occasionally mentioned the tests when talking with friends or family, but there was no sense of anticipation or expectation about what we might learn. Meanwhile, our relationship continued to thrive. David and I had always been exceptionally close, sharing similar values, interests, and even mannerisms that we attributed to having been together for so long. We finished each other's sentences, enjoyed the same foods, and even had the same quirky habit of tapping our fingers when deep in thought. Our friends often commented on how perfectly suited we were for each other, like 2 puzzle pieces that fit together seamlessly. If someone had suggested there was anything unusual about our connection, we would have dismissed it as nonsense. What we had was special, but it was the kind of special that every couple hopes to achieve: complete comfort and understanding between 2 people who loved each other deeply. The email notification arrived on a Tuesday evening while we were cooking dinner together. David was chopping vegetables for a stir-fry while I was preparing the chicken when his phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. He glanced at it casually, then his expression changed as he read the screen. I noticed the shift immediately and asked what was wrong. He simply said that our DNA results were ready and that we could view them online. We decided to wait until after dinner to look at them together, not wanting to rush through what might be an interesting discovery. As we sat at the dining table that evening, neither of us could have predicted how those results would shatter everything we thought we knew about ourselves and each other. After dinner, we settled onto the sofa with David's laptop, curious to see what our genetic heritage might reveal. The website's interface was clean and user-friendly, displaying colorful charts and maps that promised to unlock the secrets of our ancestry. We decided to look at my results first, which showed a fairly standard mix of European heritage with a small percentage of Middle Eastern ancestry that surprised us both. My mother had always told me we were of German and Irish descent, but the DNA test revealed a more complex picture of my genetic background. We spent several minutes exploring the various features, clicking through different tabs to see health predispositions and genetic traits. When it was time to view David's results, we were both excited to see what might be revealed about his biological family. Since he had been adopted with no information about his birth parents, this was potentially the first concrete information he would ever have about his genetic origins. The initial ancestry breakdown showed similar European heritage to mine, which wasn't particularly surprising given the regional demographics. But as we continued to explore, the website presented a section titled DNA Relatives, which listed people who shared significant amounts of DNA with David. The first name on the list caught us both off guard. It was mine. According to the website, we shared approximately 25% of our DNA, which the site categorized as close family. We stared at the screen in confusion, initially assuming there must be some mistake. Perhaps the lab had mixed up samples or there was an error in their system. David refreshed the page, but the information remained the same. We were listed as each other's closest genetic matches, with the relationship identified as half-sibling, grandparent-grandchild, or aunt-uncle-niece-nephew. The room suddenly felt cold as the implications of this discovery began to sink in. I started to shake, not from fear, but from a strange combination of disbelief and dawning horror. David put his arm around me, but his touch felt different now, tinged with an uncertainty that had never existed between us before. We sat in silence for what seemed like an eternity, both trying to process what this meant. The scientific precision of the results left no room for doubt. Somehow, impossibly, we were biologically related. I was the first to speak, my voice barely above a whisper, as I asked how this could be possible. David shook his head, equally bewildered. He had been adopted through a reputable agency, with all records sealed as was common in the state where he was born. I knew very little about my biological father, as my mother had always been reluctant to discuss him, saying only that their relationship had ended before I was born and that he had wanted nothing to do with raising a child. The pieces of this puzzle were scattered and incomplete, but the picture they were forming was one we couldn't bear to look at directly. We spent the rest of the evening in a state of shock, moving through the house like ghosts as we tried to make sense of this revelation. The comfortable spaces that had felt like home just hours before now seemed foreign and unwelcoming. Every photo on the wall, every memory we shared, was suddenly cast in a different light. The intimacy that had been the foundation of our marriage now felt inappropriate, even though it had been built on complete ignorance of the truth. How could we go back to being the same people when our entire identity as a couple had been fundamentally altered? Sleep came fitfully that night, with both of us tossing and turning in what now felt like separate worlds despite sharing the same bed. In the darkness, I could hear David's breathing, a sound that had always comforted me, but now served as a constant reminder of our biological connection. The scientific reality was undeniable, yet emotionally, we were still the same people who had fallen in love years ago. This dissonance between fact and feeling created a chasm of confusion that neither of us knew how to cross. As dawn broke, we faced a new reality that neither of us had chosen, but would have to navigate together, despite the growing awareness that our journey as husband and wife had reached an unexpected and devastating end. The following days were a blur of frantic research and emotional turmoil. We contacted the DNA testing company immediately, demanding verification of the results and explanation for how such a mistake could have occurred. Their response was professional but firm. The laboratory had run the samples twice to confirm the findings, and the probability of error was less than 1 in a billion. They offered to retest us at no additional cost, but we both knew it wouldn't change the outcome. The science was irrefutable. We were biologically related in a way that society considered taboo and illegal in terms of marriage. With the scientific confirmation established, we turned our attention to the more complicated question of how this could have happened. David contacted the adoption agency that had handled his case, requesting any non-identifying information they could provide about his birth parents. Meanwhile, I reached out to my mother, who lived in another state, asking if we could schedule a video call to discuss something important. These conversations would prove to be pivotal in unraveling the mystery that had upended our lives. David received a response from the adoption agency within a week. They provided limited information about his birth mother, a young woman who had been 22 when she gave birth, single, and working as a waitress in a city 2 hours from where he had been raised. The file contained no information about his birth father, as the mother had declined to provide those details. What was most interesting, however, was the timing of David's birth. It occurred just 7 months before my own birth date, in the same hospital where I was later delivered. This coincidence seemed too significant to ignore. My conversation with my mother was even more revealing. When I brought up the subject of my biological father, she became unusually defensive, questioning why I was asking about him after all these years. I explained about the DNA test and the shocking results, watching her face through the screen as the color drained from it. After a long silence, she finally began to speak, her voice trembling as she recounted a story she had buried for decades. My mother had been involved with a married man when she was young, a relationship that ended badly when she discovered she was pregnant. He had insisted she terminate the pregnancy, but she refused, resulting in their immediate separation. A few months later, devastated and alone, she met another man at a local bar. They had a brief but intense affair before he disappeared without explanation. Shortly after, she discovered she was pregnant again. Convinced this second man would also abandon her, she made the difficult decision to place this child for adoption, wanting to give him a better life than she could provide as a single mother with limited resources. She never told anyone about this pregnancy, not even her own parents, carrying the secret alone for over 3 decades. As my mother spoke, the pieces began to fall into place. The timeline matched David's birth date, and the location was consistent with the limited information we had from the adoption agency. But the most shocking revelation was yet to come. When I asked for the name of the man who had fathered her first child, my mother hesitated before finally speaking a name that made my blood run cold. It was the same name as David's adoptive father. The implications of this connection were staggering. David's adoptive parents had been unable to have children of their own, which led them to adopt through the same agency where my biological mother had placed her child. What none of them could have known was that David's adoptive father was also my biological father, making us half-siblings through him while also being connected through David's adoption into the same family. The web of relationships was so convoluted that it took us several days to fully comprehend how all these connections had converged to bring 2 half-siblings together as husband and wife. Armed with this information, we faced a new and even more difficult reality. Not only were we biologically related, but our relationship had been facilitated by the man who was biologically my father and David's adoptive father. The complexity of these connections created a moral and emotional labyrinth that seemed impossible to navigate. Every aspect of our identity, as individuals, as a couple, and as members of our respective families, had been fundamentally altered by these revelations. The foundation upon which we had built our life together had crumbled, leaving us standing in the rubble of a relationship that could never be viewed the same way again. The weight of our discovery pressed down on us with increasing intensity as we began to consider the broader implications of our situation. Beyond the personal devastation we were experiencing, there were legal, social, and ethical dimensions that required careful consideration. Our marriage, once a source of joy and stability, was now technically invalid and, in the eyes of the law, incestuous. This realization brought with it a cascade of practical concerns that demanded immediate attention. We decided to consult with a family law attorney who specialized in unusual cases. After hearing our story, she confirmed that our marriage was indeed voidable due to the biological relationship, though she explained that the legal process would be relatively straightforward since there was no dispute about the facts. What was more complicated were the financial implications. Our shared assets, the house we owned together, retirement accounts, and insurance policies would all need to be untangled. The attorney recommended mediation rather than litigation, given the unique circumstances and our mutual desire to handle the situation with as much dignity as possible. While navigating these legal considerations, we also had to face the social consequences of our discovery. How would we explain our separation to friends, colleagues, and extended family? The truth was so extraordinary that many might find it difficult to believe, yet it was too significant to conceal completely. We eventually decided on a carefully crafted explanation that acknowledged the DNA test results without explicitly stating the nature of our relationship, citing previously unknown genetic incompatibility as the reason for our separation. It was a partial truth that spared us from having to share the full extent of our situation while still providing a plausible explanation for our sudden breakup. The emotional toll of these decisions was immense. Every conversation about legal separation felt like a betrayal of the vows we had taken. Even those vows were now voided by circumstances beyond our control. We found ourselves oscillating between grief for the relationship we were losing and a strange sense of relief that we had discovered the truth before having children. The thought of bringing a child into this situation was horrifying, and we were grateful that our decision to wait until we felt financially stable had inadvertently prevented a much more complicated scenario. As we began the process of physically separating our lives, we discovered how deeply intertwined we had become. The simple act of dividing possessions became an emotional minefield, with each item representing a memory or shared experience. Books we had read together, furniture we had selected, photographs from our travels, all now carried the weight of our new reality. We decided to sell the house rather than have one person buy out the other, recognizing that neither of us could continue living in a space so filled with memories of our life together. Perhaps the most challenging aspect of this transition was redefining our relationship with each other. The love we felt hadn't disappeared, but it had transformed into something we couldn't name or comfortably acknowledge. We were no longer husband and wife, but we weren't simply acquaintances either. The biological connection that had destroyed our marriage had also created a new and complicated bond that neither of us knew how to navigate. We agreed to maintain contact after our separation, but with clear boundaries that would allow us both to heal and eventually move forward. During this difficult period, we both sought individual therapy to process the trauma of our situation. Our therapists helped us understand that we were experiencing a form of disenfranchised grief, mourning a loss that society didn't recognize as legitimate. We had lost not only our marriage, but also our shared future, our identity as a couple, and in many ways, the past we had built together. The support of professionals who understood the complexity of our situation proved invaluable as we navigated the choppy waters of this unprecedented transition. As the legal process moved forward and we established separate residences, we began to contemplate what our future relationship might look like. The biological connection that had upended our lives would continue to exist whether we acknowledged it or not. Finding a way to honor this connection while respecting the boundaries that our new reality required would be one of the greatest challenges we faced. The foundation of our relationship had shifted irrevocably, but somehow, amidst the rubble of our marriage, we needed to build a new structure that could accommodate the complex truth of who we were to each other. The months following our separation were characterized by a profound sense of disorientation. I moved into a small apartment across town, while David found a place in a neighboring city, creating physical distance that mirrored the emotional chasm between us. The silence in my new home was deafening after years of sharing space with someone whose presence had been as familiar as my own heartbeat. Every routine established during our marriage, morning coffee, evening walks, weekend errands, now required conscious effort to perform alone. The adjustment was jarring, like learning to walk again after a serious injury. During this period, I threw myself into work with renewed intensity, finding solace in the predictable rhythm of the school day. My third-grade students became my anchor, their innocent questions and boundless energy providing a welcome distraction from my complicated reality. David, meanwhile, took on several new architectural projects, immersing himself in the technical aspects of design and construction. We were both running from the same thing, but neither of us could escape the truth that had fundamentally altered our lives. Our communication during this time was limited to necessary discussions about the sale of our house and the division of assets. These conversations were conducted with a formality that felt completely alien to our previous way of interacting. The easy intimacy we had once shared had been replaced by a careful politeness that maintained boundaries while still acknowledging our unique connection. We never discussed the biological relationship directly, though it hovered over every interaction like an uninvited guest at a dinner party. The sale of our house marked a significant milestone in our separation. The colonial with the white picket fence that had represented our shared dreams was purchased by a young couple with 2 small children, their excitement about creating a home there a painful reminder of what we had lost. Watching them sign the papers, I felt a wave of grief so intense it nearly knocked the breath from me. David reached for my hand instinctively, then pulled back as he remembered our new reality. That small, aborted gesture contained volumes about the complicated nature of our relationship. The instinct to comfort each other still existed, but the parameters had changed irrevocably. As the legal aspects of our separation concluded, we faced the question of how to move forward with our lives. Both of us were in our early 30s, with decades of life ahead of us, yet the prospect of forming new romantic relationships seemed daunting. How could we explain our past to potential partners without revealing the full, complicated truth? And even if we found a way to share a modified version of our story, how could we ever trust that we wouldn't accidentally encounter another hidden genetic connection? The DNA test that had revealed our relationship had also opened our eyes to the possibility that such secrets might be more common than society acknowledged. These concerns led us to make a difficult decision. We would not pursue romantic relationships for the foreseeable future. This wasn't a conscious agreement made through discussion, but rather an unspoken understanding that evolved through our continued interactions. We were both too damaged by our experience to risk further complications in our personal lives. Instead, we focused on building new identities as individuals rather than as half of a couple. The process of reinvention was slow and often painful. I took up painting, discovering a creative outlet that allowed me to express emotions I couldn't put into words. David began volunteering with Habitat for Humanity, channeling his architectural skills into helping others build homes that represented the stability he had lost. We were both finding ways to create meaning in lives that had taken such an unexpected turn, but the path forward remained unclear. Perhaps the most unexpected development during this period was the gradual emergence of a new kind of relationship between us. As the immediate pain of our separation began to soften, we found ourselves able to interact more naturally. We occasionally met for coffee or dinner, these meetings becoming less about practical matters and more about genuine connection. There was an unspoken acknowledgement that we would always be important to each other, regardless of the biological or legal definitions of our relationship. This evolution was neither linear nor predictable. Some days were easier than others, and triggers could send either of us back into the depths of grief and confusion without warning. But gradually, we were learning to navigate the complex territory of our new reality. The love we had shared as husband and wife was transforming into something different, a bond forged in the crucible of extraordinary circumstances that neither of us had chosen but would have to carry for the rest of our lives. 2 years after our separation, I received an unexpected invitation that would once again alter the course of my life. David's adoptive mother, Eleanor, had been diagnosed with terminal cancer and had requested to see both of us together. The irony of this situation was not lost on me. The woman who had raised David as her son, unknowingly creating the circumstances that would lead to our marriage, now wanted to see us together in what would likely be her final months. We agreed to meet with Eleanor separately first, uncertain of how she would react to seeing us together. When I arrived at her home, a place I had visited countless times during our marriage, she was sitting in her favorite armchair, looking frail but determined. She motioned for me to sit, her eyes holding a mixture of sadness and understanding that took me by surprise. Before I could speak, she began to share a story she had kept hidden for over 30 years. Eleanor revealed that she had known about David's biological mother, not her identity, but the circumstances of his birth. The adoption agency had provided limited information at the time of placement, including the fact that his birth mother had been in a relationship with a married man when she became pregnant. What Eleanor had never shared with anyone, not even her husband, was that she had suspected who that married man might be. Her husband had admitted to an affair around the time of David's conception, though he had claimed it ended before any pregnancy could result. Eleanor had always wondered if there was a connection, but had never pursued it, wanting to protect her husband and the family they had built together. When David arrived for his visit later that day, Eleanor shared a similar version of this story with him. She then asked to see us together, explaining that she had something important to tell us both. As we sat in her living room, the three of us formed an unlikely triangle of people connected by secrets and circumstances beyond our control. Eleanor took a deep breath before speaking, her voice steady despite the gravity of her words. She told us that she had always known there was something special about our relationship, even before the DNA test revealed its biological foundation. The ease between us, the uncanny similarities in our mannerisms and preferences had seemed remarkable to her, though she had attributed it to the compatibility of two people well-suited to each other. Now, she believed she understood why we had been drawn to each other with such intensity. There had been a biological recognition that transcended conscious awareness. What she said next surprised us both. Rather than expressing regret or judgment about our relationship, she acknowledged the love we had shared as genuine and meaningful, regardless of its biological underpinnings. She encouraged us not to let the truth of our connection erase the beauty of what we had experienced together. Her perspective was unexpectedly compassionate, offering a framework for understanding our relationship that went beyond the simplistic categories of right and wrong. This conversation with Eleanor became a turning point in how we viewed our past and future. Her acceptance of the complexity of our situation gave us permission to reframe our own understanding of what we had experienced. The love we had shared wasn't invalidated by the discovery of our biological relationship. It had simply existed within a context we hadn't been aware of at the time. This realization didn't erase the pain or the necessity of our separation, but it did allow us to reclaim some of the positive aspects of our relationship from the shadow of its ending. In the months that followed,
as Eleanor's health declined, David and I found ourselves spending more time together, both with her and on our own. The unspoken tension between us began to dissolve, replaced by a more comfortable acceptance of our unique bond. We never returned to the intimacy we had shared as husband and wife, but we developed a different kind of closeness, one that acknowledged our biological connection without being defined by it. When Eleanor passed away 6 months later, we stood together at her funeral, supporting each other through the grief. Her husband, David's adoptive father, and my biological father maintained a careful distance from both of us, unable to fully process the complicated family dynamics that had unfolded. His discomfort was a constant reminder that not everyone could navigate the gray areas of our situation with the grace that Eleanor had demonstrated. The experience with Eleanor taught us something important about the nature of relationships. They exist on a spectrum that often defies simple categorization. Our connection to each other was multifaceted, containing elements of romantic love, familial bond, and friendship that couldn't be easily separated. By accepting this complexity, rather than trying to force it into conventional categories, we were able to find a way forward that honored the truth of our experience without being constrained by societal expectations. 5 years after the DNA test that changed everything, David and I have established a new kind of relationship that exists outside conventional definitions. We are not a couple, but we are more than friends. We are biologically related, but our connection transcends mere genetics. We share a history that is both beautiful and painful, a testament to the unpredictable ways that lives can intersect and reshape each other. Our journey has taught us that human relationships are far more complex than society's rigid categories allow for. The love we shared as husband and wife was genuine, transformative, and ultimately unsustainable within the constraints of our biological reality. The familial bond we now navigate is equally real, though it requires careful boundaries and ongoing negotiation. We have learned to hold these truths simultaneously, that our relationship was both right and wrong, beautiful and tragic, meaningful, and unsustainable. I never remarried, though I came close once to a man who worked at the school where I teach. When I shared a modified version of my story with him, he was kind but ultimately unable to move past the complications of my past. I understood his hesitation. Our situation was extraordinary, and not everyone has the capacity to navigate such complexity. David also remained single, focusing instead on his architectural practice and the volunteer work that had become so important to him. We see each other regularly, meeting for dinner or taking walks in the park where we once picnicked as a young couple. These interactions are comfortable but measured, with clear boundaries that respect the limitations of our relationship. We never discuss what might have been if we had discovered the truth earlier or later in our lives. These hypotheticals serve no purpose other than to cause pain. Instead, we focus on the present moment and the unique connection we continue to share. Our story remains largely unknown outside our immediate circle of trusted friends and family. The world isn't equipped to understand the nuances of our situation,
and we have no desire to become subjects of public curiosity or moral judgment. What we experienced was both intensely personal and universally human. The search for connection, the pain of loss, and the resilience required to rebuild after devastation. The DNA testing industry has continued to grow since our experience, with millions more people submitting samples to uncover their genetic heritage. I sometimes wonder how many others have received similarly life-altering results. How many relationships have been tested or transformed by the scientific revelations these tests provide? The ability to peer into our genetic code has opened up new possibilities for understanding our origins, but it has also created new ethical dilemmas that society is still learning to navigate. For us, the knowledge of our biological connection has become integrated into our understanding of ourselves and each other. It is neither the most important aspect of our relationship nor an insignificant detail. It is simply one thread in the complex tapestry of our shared history. We have learned to hold this truth alongside others, that love can exist in unexpected forms, that endings can also be beginnings, and that human resilience is greater than we might imagine when faced with circumstances beyond our control. As I approach my 40th birthday, I find myself reflecting on the journey that has brought me to this point. The woman I am today is fundamentally different from the one who married David with such hope and excitement all those years ago. I have experienced depths of grief I never thought possible, but I have also discovered reserves of strength I didn't know I possessed. My relationship with David has evolved in ways I never could have predicted, teaching me that human connections can adapt and transform even under the most challenging circumstances. We never return to the home we once shared, but occasionally we drive past it, observing the changes made by the young couple who purchased it. The white picket fence has been painted a different color, and the oak trees have grown taller, providing more shade than they did in our time there. These changes remind us that life moves forward, that spaces and relationships continue to evolve even after we are no longer part of them. Our story is not one with a neat conclusion or a moral that can be easily summarized. It is a testament to the messy, complicated, and often unpredictable nature of human relationships. We were husband and wife, then we discovered we were half-siblings, and now we are something else entirely. Two people bound by a history that defies simple categorization, but remains meaningful nonetheless. As I sit on my apartment balcony watching the sunset, I think about the DNA test that set this journey in motion. The scientific accuracy of those results was undeniable, but the meaning we have made from them has been entirely our own creation. We chose to face the truth with courage, to separate with dignity, and to rebuild our relationship on new terms. In doing so, we have discovered that the boundaries of human connection are more flexible than society might suggest, and that love, in all its forms, has the capacity to transcend even the most unexpected obstacles.